30 years since the birth of the World Wide Web?
I believe it. So that would reassure me that we are now in 2021. So therefore we must be talking about 1991. That was a weird era. I mean, in my pronouncements so far, I think we've got to the stage of the mid-80s where you had Macintoshes becoming available, you had other workstations beginning to become available from people like Sun and Apollo Domain, I think it was, something like that. So things were moving on, but yet, weirdly, the World Wide Web, which came after the internet, remember, is basically how should these internet capabilities be harnessed and packaged to be Sean and cameraman friendly so that ordinary mortals can do it, you know, and it was not obvious. In those early days, I seem to recall there were information services, weren't there, like Archie, WAIS, Wide Area Information Systems. People were really trying to find out, well, if we do have interconnected networks on computers, how do you know who's got what and where everything is? And I think the idea about WAIS was making basically catalogues of what's where and all this kind of thing. But I think, to be fair to him, Berners-Lee's great achievement was being able to think out of the box. Perhaps it was the fact that he was trained as a scientist and not as a computer scientist. I don't know that he could think outside the box. But basically the whole thing about, you know, the HTTP and the internet protocol and all this kind of stuff, really he managed to work out something pretty robust about how this would work in the very early days. I think we touched before, you know, on the fact that the gap between something becoming vaguely possible and something becoming commonplace could be anything up to 10 years, did we once agree? And here's a classic example of it. I mean, in 1991, yes, I was very slightly aware of it, but I didn't see it going to the internet such as it was and any developments. I didn't see it as being massively essential.
Well, of course, we didn't actually have the internet, so the news wasn't travelling.
No. True.
You had to read about it somewhere
Yeah.
in a print or some kind of mail shot in
yes,
our email.
That's right. In fact, my very earliest usages of the web when it became available were for really boring things, like working out that so-and-so had got a set of files that implemented something on another Unix machine. So, wow, we didn't necessarily have to make a magnetic tape or burn a CD or whatever. We could actually go to that site, not just to pick up a bit of email, because that was fairly straightforward, but also to actually, with permission, download a whole suite of files. What about photos then? My memory about early attempts to download photos down an early web thing, I mean, honestly.
But my memory is of being at university and a friend of mine going on BBS's, bulletin board systems.
Yes.
And this was after the World Wide Web existed, but we had some sort of fractured connection to the web through a BBS.
Yes.
And yeah, occasionally you might be sent some photos and it took an age to download them, and by the time they downloaded, were they what you wanted in the first place? Possibly not. And
yeah.
Do you go off and spend another several minutes waiting for the next one to download?
Yes. I think this is where we would benefit, if people want us to say more on this, from having got Julian Onions as part of the Computerphile team, as it were, because he was with me, I think, as I remember, in that first phase of his career at Nottingham. I think he was with me till the early 90s, and he would be pretty sound on which machine was it that first had a web browser on it capable of even visiting another site, let alone doing anything serious. The ability to actually have, what should we say, interactive video material made available at ultra slow speeds over the web may have been, in the early to mid 90s, among the ultra keen people who could just about bear getting it to work. But how long does it take to become commonplace? The answer, as ever, is 10 years. My major concern at the time, late 80s, early 90s, exactly this era, for me, was a transition from Postscript to PDF. Now, we've done videos on certain aspects of this, but I think perhaps what I haven't explained about my great adventures in this regard was that in the middle 1980s, and with the development and announcement of Postscript basically as a graphics language available on Macintoshes and notoriously available by having a laser printer running that language, requiring enormous amounts of memory for the time, costing a fortune. It couldn't be got any cheaper than $7,000. But it was touch and go. I mean, the hardware was only just fast enough to render that page at that time. What struck me at the time, and I was very much in the era of knowing that my future in some sense would lie in documents, digital documents, electronic publishing, I thought, you know, there is something about this language because, of course, Postscript is Turing complete. It's a weird language, remember. It works on a stack. You overtly program in reverse Polish. You don't say A plus B or even plus AB. You say AB plus. And in a much more verbose way, that is the way Postscript works, on top of it being an excellent 2D graphics language. Moving beyond what most printers would have regarded as the toy of the laser printer, people began to ask, would it be possible to put this Postscript language on real typesetters? Yes, it would. And a bit bemused, I think, by the runaway success of the Apple LaserWriter, yes, it was Linotype that took the initiative of saying yes to an idea internally about how do we try and migrate Postscript onto a real typesetter. Because I've talked about my adventures with the 202 typesetter, but it was not Postscript based. But they tried one out just as an idea. And people said, oh, that's wonderful, we want it. Don't matter about the cost too much, but you'll have to get it down quite a lot from that if you want to sell lots and lots of them. So in the end then, that convinced me that just in my narrow world of journal publication, I wanted to create an electronic documents learned journal, which I did. Didn't run for very long because the electronic documents learned conference was far more popular than the journal. So we started off with electronic publishing, but then gradually it morphed into being a vehicle for publishing the proceedings of the document engineering symposium, as it were, and it's gone to great guns from there. But anyway, I was messing about then at an early stage with doing proceedings for conferences, all in Postscript, and thinking, well, this is good because you're actually archiving a program, and this could run, you know, although the hardware will be very different and maybe they're emulating a layer on top of it, there will always be a way you can write an interpreter for Postscript. So here's my electronic archive that is potentially machine independent. Yes, of course, printers archived, but they always archived on the basis that the world would be ruled totally by, you know, monotype and linotype, and they are in charge and what they say goes. And I was treated like a pariah for saying, I'm sorry, it's not going to be like that. It's all about computer graphics, and it's computing companies that are going to win out of this, not just purely graphic typesetter companies. And I was right, but nobody would listen to me at the time. So yes, this is perhaps another anecdote of how I met John Warnock, because people ask me and say, well, how did Adobe get to know about your conviction that Postscript would be a good archiving mechanism? And the answer was that I was working with John Wiley UK, the publishers, journal publishers at the time, and suddenly my contact at Wiley's down on the south coast got a, "Dear Mark Bide," that was the name, "we understand from our contacts that you are considering doing a future journal related to electronic publishing, and that it might be under consideration as to whether to use Postscript as the typesetting language and as the archiving language. Would you care to join me and my colleague, Dr. Chuck Geschke, for tea in London at the Park Lane Hotel, I think it was. Signed, yours sincerely, John Warnock, the two co-founders of Adobe. So Mark rang me up in great excitement and said, well, you know, this madcap idea of yours of using the most expensive typesetting software solution seems to at least have got the big boys interested. And yes, it was absolutely hilarious. I mean, John was and is a good friend as a result of this, largely because it was clear he and Chuck were such good friends and so much singing from the same hymn sheet. There was nothing put on about it. They just said, we're delighted you're doing this and we'll give you every help, obviously, you know. I think at the end of the talk, they did indicate that there were works in progress that might come up with a sort of version of Postscript that was much more suited to doing electronic documents. I think the feeling was, well, Postscript's wonderful, but it is Turing complete, and in a sense it's too powerful. There is nothing in Postscript to say, here is my code for rendering this page, it will be beautiful. But tell you what, just to annoy you all, before I do this, I'm going to use Postscript to calculate Ackermann 4.2, which, as we all know, takes 27 quadrillion years, or even Ackermann 3.1, which might take 15 minutes. Of course you wouldn't do that, but somebody malevolent might do that to you. So in a sense, Postscript being Turing complete was perhaps a bit too powerful for something that only needed a declarative statement of, I want this to happen, exactly this. I will leave the implementation of it to you. Now, in a way, it rang bells when the web became available, because here was yet another declarative solution, but coming from a slightly different direction. So this Adobe thing, which was eventually revealed to me as PDF, and the other declarative solution, which was not as, how shall we say, dot for dot accurate at the time as Postscript, I saw them very much as being complementary. You know, if you want ultra super Vogue fashion magazines electronically over the web, yes, it's going to be PDF. If you just want some pretty decent graphics, although it's developed a lot, World Wide Web, but using a declarative model of the HTML language, where I think, as we've discussed, the difference between an imperative language that can do Ackermann's function and a declarative one that can't is that one that is Turing complete, that can do anything, needs to be able to ask for more memory and get it. There is no way in PDF for overtly asking and saying, give me lots of memory because I want to mess about and make you unbelievably slow. And that's a great advantage, to have a restricted language that will try and stop people playing games.
If you could have hidden things in PDF, would it have taken off?
I don't think it would, and I think I remember hearing that there'd been a robust discussion at Adobe to the effect that one or two people were starting to use Postscript kind of preludes to do all sorts of weird and hairy things, and wasn't this a fantastic selling point for PDF as a wrapper format for anything and everything? And the answer came back from somebody on the team there saying, basically, this is not a feature, it is a bug, and we have got to sit on it firmly. People are now, of course, utterly aware of Trojans and so on and so forth in a way that they weren't in the kind of late 80s, early 90s, when this was just seen as, oh, wow, isn't this incredible? So that was the situation then. You'd got like a bit of a chasm between the two, between HTML and PDF. One of the things that fortunately happened around about the early 90s was that Tim Berners-Lee and others headed off at the pass any attempt to make, as it were, the web be the property of either Apple or Microsoft or whoever. He set up the World Wide Web Consortium, whose, you know, one of its founding tenets was to try and be platform neutral, fair to everybody, and to have clearly published standards, the World Wide Web Consortium that everybody could agree to, and nobody would try and pull a fast one on anybody else. Because I think even Microsoft had to admit they'd try and rule the world with it, but they wouldn't succeed. But latterly, of course, what has changed everything, and again, this business about just faintly possible to send a photograph or a slow-moving movie in the early to mid-90s, everything totally routine and above board. YouTube 2004, 5, something like that. What was needed, of course, in those 10 years was not just any further realization about the language. It was just the infrastructure needed to be faster. So there, of course, you're up against telcos, and telecom companies have to be sufficiently enough of computer companies or have big clients saying, we need more bandwidth. We do not want 38 kilobits per second out of Apple Talk, thank you very much. We would like it to be at least 38 megabits, right? Factor of 1,000 faster. Now get on with it. But of course, once it's been established that serious people with serious money will pay for that, then development will follow. But there is always a bit of a lag, a bit of an induction period for people to say, yeah, you know, that idiot Brailsford is right, this is going to take off, we'd better make plans.
RPC protocols and network stacks and so on, and just quickly bolted on a thing that let it be accessed as a, probably a GIF actually.
Point size of it. And the operator, this is called select font. So it binds this point size to this font and says, right, that's what we're using.